Hello, good morning everyone. I hope you guys are having a relaxed time because even last Friday we didn't have a computer class. I've given a assignment to do. Only certain people are doing. Why everybody is resting? Huh? See, they have reached till Q. They started writing till Q, but nobody. I think only 5 or 6 of them are doing. Rest all of you are sleeping or what? Say, this is all for you all, not for me. Understood? You should respond, please. Or otherwise, this like we can't see face to face. And if you are not responding to the assignments, what is a big deal of me talking to you and saying that you should do this, you should do that? It is communication. If you want to speak, you should know the language. If you want to talk, you should know the appropriate words. For that, you should need a good vocabulary. That's why I told you to write words. And only a few of them are doing it. They are doing it, I tell you, they are doing it very, every day they are doing it for me. They sent the message and saying that teacher, we have completed till this and that. They are doing it promptly, but certain people are not doing, which is very sad. I tell you, so that's about that. Let us start with communication barrier. What is communication barriers? See, I tell you, when you start talking to another person, if there is any hindrance, that is causes what is called a communication barrier. So, when we talk to another person, suppose certain people has got a tampering. You know what tampering is? Say, when we talk to it like this. So, they have a barrier in which their sound won't be heard in the way they want to deliver. So there is a hindrance, there is a problem in which they can't communicate with each other. So that is called the communication barrier, which is a hindrance in the flow of communication. If you can't communicate directly to a person, there is a hindrance. That is called a communication barrier. What are the hindrances that we often have when we talk to another person? What are the difficulties? What are the difficulties in communicating? That is what we are going to study today. Certain people told me that you should start from barriers of communication. That's why I am starting from there. Communication barrier, that is a hindrance that happens while communicating between two or more people. What is the hindrance that makes us not to open our mouth? What is the problem in communication? That's what we are going to identify. So communication barrier implies a form of hindrance, a barrier in the flow of communication. When one party is not able to convey the message to another party accurately, clearly and independently. So when one party is not able to communicate accurately, independently and clearly, there is a communication barrier. So what is a communication barrier? Is the hindrance that is there when we start communicating with each other. If the communication is not clear, accurate and if it is not appropriate, we can't communicate. So we are going to study what are the barriers that prevent us from communicating with another people. So, communication barrier is a form of hindrance or a barrier in the flow of communication. We can't communicate. There are some barriers. What are these barriers? That is what we are going to deal with. So, it is the hindrance in communicating between two or more people in the flow of communication. That is called the communication barrier. There are certain hindrances. What are they? Let us see. See, what are the barriers of communication? First one is interpersonal communication. Actually, what is intrapersonal communication is when we communicate with ourselves. See, suppose if you sing a song to ourselves, we know that after listening to a song, we sing, isn't it? That is actually an intrapersonal communication. That actually we do with ourselves. We know that we always talk in the mind with us, isn't it? But that should be a positive talk. It shouldn't be a negative one. We should talk to ourselves. We should develop a nice communication. We should be always positive. Understood? So intrapersonal is the talk that we do with ourselves. Understood? In that case, we find certain introvert people. See, certain people are by nature introverts. What are introverts? They won't speak up. Understood? So, in the intrapersonal is certain people's qualities or characteristics. By default they are like that. Some people won't talk, isn't it? Even in classes they say that, teacher, that boy won't talk to anyone, he's like that. But we know that we have certain boys who always ask doubts, isn't it? For an example, I had Tamare, who you always used to ask me doubts. I know that. I was taking that class 9C, in which I had Tamare always asking me doubts. See, there are certain people who always ask out, but there are certain people who never ask. They are called introverts. They do interpersonal. So all this are personal characters which prevents us from communication. Okay, so intrapersonal communication refers to the element within a person which act as a barrier. As I told you, why this? See, some people are by nature introverts, so that is a barrier. They won't talk, they won't speak up. Understood? Such people are really, but when they are in a circle of friends, they speak. So that is a barrier in communication. That is intrapersonal barriers. It is how we are brought up. Understood? It all depends on how we mingle with. Characters are formed. I'll tell you how the characters are formed from our house, how we are brought up, then the people that we mingle, from them, and from the school, from the atmosphere that we get from the school, from everywhere you go, you develop yourself. Certain people by default they won't speak up, because at home they will be like that, they won't speak much. So that is actually a barrier which is by default we develop such barriers. So in such cases what we have to do is we have to come up with that. We have to find a way to express our emotions, express our necessities. At least we should speak up to what we need to. Otherwise what happens is everything will be suppressed. As you know, people are now getting depressed. Every time when there is an issue, they'll say that he was taking depression tablet. We know about Sushant, isn't it? He was actually doing very good in Hindi movies, and the roles he played was really good. He was from a very middle class family and came to the top. But what happened was, all of a sudden it was said that he was depressed and he couldn't speak up. So that is not the case. And I'm telling you, in person you should talk to your friends. Even in your games or anything, you should talk to your friends. You should talk to your teachers. If you want any doubt, if you have any doubt, or if you want to talk to me, you can always do that. You should speak up, or else everything, once if you keep, everything get busted. So this is about intrapersonal communication barrier. That is a barrier which we keep as person, say, which act as a barrier in communication and in analyzing and interpreting information that is available. So sometimes we won't speak up because we are not clear about the information, isn't it? So we won't speak up. Sometimes we won't talk because we don't know the language. All this can be a intrapersonal communication barrier. As I told you, certain people are introverts, they won't speak up. But even if we want to speak, we won't, because we don't know the place, we don't have the proper information, we don't have the proper language to communicate. All this can be intrapersonal barriers. So it refers to the element within our personality which act as a barrier in communication. So what is intrapersonal communication barrier? It refers to the elements, or it refers to the characteristics that is inbuilt within us which act as a barrier in communication. So intrapersonal communication barrier is a barrier which we develop in ourselves, okay, that act as a barrier in which we cannot communicate with other person. So it is a barrier which refers to the elements or the characteristics in a person which act as a barrier in communication. The elements or characteristics in a person which act as a barrier in communication. That is called the intrapersonal communication barrier. So what are the cases that can cause this barrier? All individuals are unique and have different personalities. Attitude, values, knowledge, etc. differs, isn't it? Say, I am different from your maths teacher, I am different from your maths teacher is different from Hindi teacher is different from Malayalam teacher. Everybody is different. Even you all, everyone is different, isn't it? In my classes, I had Neha, then Georgie, then I had, this is because I was taking 9C. So many people, they had different characters, because even above, he had a different character. Georgie, he had a different character. Then Atira, she had a different character. So what happened is, everyone is different, understood? Nobody is similar. Our attitudes, our personalities, our knowledge, our values, everything differs. So this all built up in our intrapersonal communication barrier. This all are a part of the communication barriers. Then we react differently to different situations. I tell you, some people react very fast, some won't react. That doesn't mean that they liked it, but they don't react. Some people won't react. Some people react very fast. So these are all characteristics that affects the intrapersonal barriers. And let us explore the cases to lead to intrapersonal barriers. One is wrong assumptions, varied perception, differing background, wrong interference. So why people keep this barrier? Why we keep a barrier in talking to other people, or why we don't respond to an environment like another person? Because we have our own assumptions or wrong assumptions. See, certain situations we won't talk because we are afraid whether they will take it in a different sense. Then we have varied perceptions. If some people say that this is the case, we have a different opinion. So sometimes we never speak about it. Now, different backgrounds. So as I told you earlier, even the house that we live in is it's a place where we form our character, isn't it? So we are from a different background. So it won't, if I say something and you don't agree, so better to keep quiet. So what people do is they never talk much. Then the wrong interference. If I say something, how the other people take. So these are all cause of intrapersonal barriers. So what the other people will think, so we never speak. Then we are from a different background, they are from a different background, so how they interact. Even the dresses we wear, isn't it? Some people are very cool in jeans and tops, but that is very common nowadays. So some people never wear that because they think that is a very bad dress, but I don't know. I know that everybody wears that nowadays, but in our time it was a different one, isn't it? When a person wears a jeans and a top, they will look at like, oh, they are from some aliens. So like that only they think. That all is their perceptions from their background, how they interact. Then wrong assumptions. So if we see somebody, we don't go and talk to them because we are afraid whether they are talking, how they take, how they treat us, how they respond to our communication. So we think that they have a wrong assumption. We have a wrong assumption, and we are very, very afraid of speaking up. So these are all can be a cause for intrapersonal barriers. This can all cause an intrapersonal barrier, which is wrong assumptions, varied perception, differing backgrounds, and wrong interference. All this, actually we all have that, which are all inbuilt in us. This all are actually preventing us from coming up or giving an opinion. Understood? So these are all intrapersonal barriers that are developed in our character, which is inbuilt in us. Now, see, wrong assumptions is how the people will take. Then sometimes when we speak, we does not realize the background, education of the receiver. See, when I was asked to take a class in 5th standard and the same topic which we take in 11th standard, because 5th it is a very milder one and 11th it is a very deeper one. So I should know how to convey in 5th as well as in 11th, isn't it? So Similarly, when we talk to one person, when we talk to a person who knows the language English, we speak to them in English. When we talk to a person who knows only Malayalam, if we start speaking them to in English, what will they do? They can't understand. I'll tell you, before we used to have people who do who used to come here with translators. Even the Russian presidents, they come with translators. What they speak, that this person will translate. So what happens is, there are so many jokes in it. Rahul Gandhi came and somebody translated it in a different way. So there are people, they don't know to convey in our language. So what happens is, all the things will become different when the other person translates it. So we are afraid to speak because we don't know how the other people will take it up. To be a good communicator, you should put yourself in the other person's shoe. Very good. See, when we speak to another person, we should always consider their point also. We should not go and fight with another person unless and until we know how much they are worried about. Everyone is suffering. Nowadays, the teachers, though they know the technology or what, they have to come up here and use the board, which is actually, and have to stand in front of the camera and to speak to you. These are all different things which teachers are undergoing. They are in stress. So even you, because you guys are not getting the enough of what you want. When we were in the class, you could have asked the doubt immediately, isn't it? That we cannot do now. So even you guys are stressed. So this is all because, so when you complain or when you say something, you should always think that the other people is equally stressed like you are only. So that is it about wrong assumptions. Then, as I told you, varied perception. Varied perceptions means certain people will have different views. There is a story in which 7 blind men went to see an elephant. They saw different part of elephant and they had their own views about the elephant. But 7 people were all blind. So one saw the tail and they said the elephant is like this, thin and having hair at the end. But we know that elephant is not thin. Then another person said it is too big because he touched the legs. Another person touched the stomach and he said it is so huge. So that's it. When we see a movie or when we see a dance or when we see somebody, we all have different perceptions about the thing. When somebody sees a movie, I say, oh, it's very good. Another person says it's not that good. That scene was not good. This was not good. So this all depends on how we view. Understood? So these are all developed by our intrapersonal skills. Intrapersonal barriers is developed through all this, through our perceptions, then through the backgrounds. Then see, as I told you earlier, our backgrounds plays an important role. A computer company explains about the heart. See, when we go to a doctor and doctor is saying that, oh, you are having this disease, and he gives a very big explanation about the disease. This is the term, this is the medicine you have to give. So we will be like, oh, see, but actually maybe it will be a blood pressure or a cholesterol or something. If you give big names of that, we will get collapse, isn't it? So when we communicate, we should know the background also. Our background plays an important role. To be a good communicator or speaker, we should know the background. A computer company representative explained about the hardware in detail in the hospital management system to install to the group of doctors. They won't know, isn't it? So one person who sells a computer will go to the doctor and say that this is the CPU, this is the motherboard, or it has got all the ports which is connected to this, that and all. They won't understand. So if, the same way the doctors also, if they tell them about this is the name of the disease and this is the medicine you have to take, so we won't understand also. So that is the case. So this all differs the background, and then wrong interference, as I told you earlier, this intrapersonal communication barrier is mostly caused because of wrong interference also. We don't know what is happening. Actually, I tell you, in the news, every time when we have a news headlines, they'll say that, see, now nowadays it is corona, they'll say that, oh, see, here in Trivandrum you got around 100 people affected, so we will be like, where it is. So actually when it comes to the news, after 2 or 3 minutes another news will come saying that it is only 25 of them, 5 is appeared negative, or the testing was going on, but the first information was 100 of them got corona today. So these are all wrong interference. Whenever they get, they'll just blah blah blah, they'll go on saying the news again and again, but actually only at the end we'll know that this has what happened. Similarly, we also have certain wrong assumptions or about certain people. See, wrong interference when we assume that something without knowing the whole truth. There are some dramatic facts and can cause gossips and rumors. So some people are very, very afraid to speak up because they think what other people will think, and if we don't know the full details, we needn't have to speak because there will be rumors. When something we speak without knowing, the other people will think that, okay, oh, this person knows everything and she is acting too smart. So that is all because of all this, people never speak up. Understood? Now that is about intrapersonal barriers. Intrapersonal barriers are due to all this. Understood? We have our own perceptions is our own point of view. We have our own backgrounds, as I told you. Then we have our own we have a wrong interference, whether the other people will take us correctly or not. All this are a part of intrapersonal communication barrier. Wrong assumption, varied perception, differing background, wrong interference. All this all are part of intrapersonal communication barriers. If you have a communication barrier in ourselves, this is because of all this. We have wrong assumptions. We don't know how the other people will think. That varied perception, we have a different idea about other person or about the subject. That differing backgrounds, we are from different backgrounds. That wrong interference, we have a wrong interference means we won't know how to how the other people will take. See, all this are causes of intrapersonal communication barriers. Then the next one is about interpersonal communication. When we communicate with another person, what are the things, what are the barriers that we are undergoing? That is called the interpersonal communication barrier, which prevents us from talking to another person. The same thing only. Say, what prevents us from talking to another person? What are the barriers that prevents us from talking to other person? That was what are the barriers that we have, which prevents us from communicating with the other person. This is how the interpersonal, that is how we communicate to people, why we are not communicating to the other person. That is called the interpersonal communication. That is intrapersonal and this is interpersonal. Between two people, what are the communication barriers that prevents us from communicating with each other? First is limited vocabulary. We don't know how to speak to them, maybe that. Then verbal or non-verbal messages, we don't see mismatching, we can't understand what they are trying to communicate. Next is emotional outburst. Some people takes everything emotionally. Understood? So we are afraid of that, so we don't speak to them. Communication selective. Certain people only like to communicate with certain people. So what happens? We don't communicate much, or when we speak, they won't listen. So that means they are selective listeners. They only listen what they want. So in that cases also, we don't speak up much to that person, isn't it? That cultural weightage, as I told you, background is very important. So we don't speak much to a person which from a different culture or which is very weird from us. We don't go and speak to them very often, isn't it? Then poor listening skill. Sometimes we won't listen, we just go and talk to them, so or they won't listen. So that all can cause an interpersonal communication barrier. So what is interpersonal communication barrier? The barrier that is because the barrier that is caused while we are talking to another person. That is called the interpersonal communication barrier. It prevents us from communicating with two or more people. What is that barrier which prevents us from communicating to another person? Say this can be the reason. Maybe we have a limited vocabulary. Maybe we are not compatible to send messages to them. Then emotional outbursts. We don't know how the people react. Then some people, as I told you, they have selective friends and selective listeners. They won't listen much. Then the other one is cultural variation. We have different backgrounds, so we don't know how the other people will take. And the last one is poor listening skill. Some people will listen only to respond. They won't listen much, and they are not interested also. So this all can be a cause for interpersonal communication. Why we are not talking to another person? Maybe this can be the reason. So interpersonal communication barrier is that which prevents us from communicating. What prevents us from communicating with two or more people? The first one is what prevents us from communicating with anyone. That is called the intrapersonal communication barrier, which refers to the element within us that prevents from communicating with other people. The next one is what prevents us from communicating to two or more people. That is called the interpersonal communication barrier. The same only. Some people are very selective. Then we have environment based communication barrier. That is when we want to speak, there will be some noise around, so we can't hear. So that is the barrier which is caused by the environment. So three main communication barriers. One is intrapersonal, that the characters that we have, that we possess, so that we can communicate with other person. Second one is interpersonal communication. That is how two peoples communicate. Why we are not communicating to two or more people? What is the problem? Why we are not communicating? That is interpersonal communication. The next one is environment based communication, in which the noise, sound, everything can be a cause. Or if we are in a crowd, we won't talk because we are sitting in a crowd. That can be a cause why we didn't speak. Then the sound, maybe we can't hear. That is why we are not speaking. Maybe that can be the reason. So this all causes communication barrier. So three main things that causes communication barriers. What is communication barrier? The hindrance that occurs while we are communicating with another person. So what are the three things? One is intrapersonal communication barrier, which that we have developed within us. That is why we are not communicating to other person. Next one is interpersonal communication barrier. Interpersonal communication barrier. That happens when we try to speak to two or more people, but we can't communicate. What is the hindrance? Maybe, as I told you, we are from different culture, we have different vocabulary, we don't know how they respond. Maybe that. So this is interpersonal communication barrier. And the last one is environment based communication barrier, which can be caused due to the distraction, sound from different places, or whether they are sitting in an unhygienic place, or whether because of the too crowd or too hot we don't communicate. Maybe this can be another reason for a communication barrier. So three types of communication barriers which we have to study. One is interpersonal, intrapersonal, and environment. I'll tell you once more. I hope it is clear. Intrapersonal communication refers to the element within us that prevents us from communicating. The element that is within us that prevents us from communicating. That is intrapersonal communication. The elements that we have developed within us that prevents us from communicating is called the intrapersonal communication. Now, interpersonal is actually we don't know how to communicate. So, interpersonal communication is something that prevents us from taking an effort to communicate with one or two people. That is interpersonal communication, something that prevents us from communicating with two or more people. And the last one is environment based communication barrier that is caused because of the environment. Maybe it is too hot, too noisy, or too much of a crowd. We are not talking. That is the case. I hope today's class is okay with you all. And thank you, dear children.